right, so we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about something I'm super excited to talk about because it is something that I've had to suffer through for the last 20 years. It's finding leaks, how to fix them, and really, it's something that I shouldn't know as much as I know about it. The only reason I know this stuff is because I've had to deal with it. So I'm so excited to share it with you because I hope I can help you avoid the same challenges that we've had to face. And again, please do go back and share this with your teams. And what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about different types of leaks, their causes, and how to identify the leaks. We're going to talk about basic leak detection tools, the processes and techniques that we use to find leaks, and how to fix them as well. And we're going to talk about how to prevent leaks by following the River Pools way. So here's the thing with this today. I am probably going to suffer from what we call the curse of knowledge, meaning that, I'm probably going to be talking out ahead of what your knowledge base is. So, when that's happening, just flag me down and stop me and ask questions. And so, we're going to cover a lot of ground today, and you're going to kind of be drinking through a fire hose. But I do want you to ask questions along the way. There's going to be lots of things that we're going to touch on, so there will be lots of opportunities to ask questions. And also, I want to hear feedback from you on different things that you've seen or learned about leaks and the things that we can do to make sure that we are preventing them and understanding how to fix them. So, all right. So what are the signs of a leak? So a lot of times we'll get a call from a customer, or we might have a team member show up and they're like, man, I think we might have a leak. So some signs: water loss, obviously, just the need to constantly add chemicals. And that's not necessarily an indicator, but it can be. Sometimes we can have mushy or wet spots in the yard. Air bubbles or dirt that are shooting into the pool or flooding into the strainer pot. And then if we have more water in the drain pipe around the outside of the pool than normal, then that might be a sign we have a leak as well. So one of the things that, we know evaporation, we know we lose water in the pool due to evaporation, but how much evaporation is normal? And the answer is kind of like, how much does a swimming pool cost? The answer is, it really depends. And depends on a couple different things, but there's a really cool tool that the Anderson company has developed, and Anderson is also the leaktools.com company, and they created this evaporation estimator. So what this does is, and you guys can see that, correct? I switched screens, you guys are good? Okay. So you can enter in a zip code, like this is the zip code for my house, and it auto-fills the dew point, the wind speed, the air pressure, the water temp, all the weather conditions. You can tell it what your wind shelter level is. And so I'm kind of typical here. Water movement is normal. And then you can calculate, and it will tell you that you're going to lose about 1/10 of an inch a day is what you can expect to lose in that environment, which is pretty cool. So if you ever have a question about how much water loss is normal due to evaporation in my area, then you can always go to this tool and find out. So, but there's some other things that, in Virginia, we'll usually, just in general terms during the summertime, just to put this in perspective, if there's no water features running and there's no automatic pool cover and there's not a lot of wind, it's normal for us to lose about 1 inch to 1.5 inches a week due to evaporation in a pool, just to give you an idea. Now, out in Arizona, I don't even know what the evaporation level would be. I have no idea. And just to give you an idea too, if you have water features running, if we're throwing water, in the air basically, then what that's doing is that's breaking the surface tension of the water and causing more evaporation. So you could lose as much as 3 or more inches in a week here due to evaporation. You could lose about that much in high wind conditions as well. So what actually happens with evaporation is normal evaporation. If you have kind of a static type environment without a lot of wind, with a lot of water features going, what happens is the water actually evaporates and creates this kind of blanket of water vapor over top of the pool. And it acts like a solar, not a solar, but more of an evaporation blanket. And when the wind blows, that blows that blanket off, and then, you know, the rate that the surface tension and the hydrogen bonds and the water molecules break up and detach from each other, that increases, and that's what causes more evaporation. But some factors that can play into this, in terms of how much evaporation, whether or not you have an automatic pool cover, that dramatically reduces the amount of evaporation, the wind, water features, air temperature, and humidity. So these are all factors to consider. So types of leaks. Let's talk about the different types of leaks for a sec. So there's two basic types. If you boil it down, there's really only two types of leaks that we can have. Plumbing leaks is one. Okay, so plumbing leaks would be in any water line or electrical line, any PVC line, including the light conduits. We would call that a plumbing leak. And then there's structural leaks. And a structural leak is a leak in the pool shell, or where the pool might be losing water around the outside of a fitting. And we use the term white goods. The white goods, that can be the skimmer, the returns, any type of a light fitting, main drain fittings. So white goods are any fitting that's installed in the pool is what we call a white good. So two basic types of leaks: plumbing leaks and structural leaks. So when we talk about plumbing leaks, we're gonna kind of go into different types of. And if you're not muted, you might want to mute if you're not muted. Thanks. It's important when we talk about plumbing leaks that we understand basically how a pump works. So, you know, when coming in the front of the pump, we have the suction side. So all the water from the pool, from the skimmers, from any main drain fittings, that's pulled into the front of the pump, and then it goes into the volute and hits the impeller, and then that water is discharged out of the pressure side. So it's important to understand that, because any leak in the plumbing that's on the suction side is going to behave differently than leaks would be on the pressure side. So basically anything on the suction side, because there's a suction, when the pump's running, it's not going to be pushing water out. It's actually going to be sucking air in. And on the pressure side, when the pump's running, we're going to be pushing more water out than we would with the pump not running. So when we talk about plumbing leaks, there's really, we got pressure side, suction side, and then we also have conduit leaks. It's important to understand suction versus pressure. So what are some signs of a suction side plumbing leak? One would be air bubbles that are coming into the pump strainer pot. Another would be, and oftentimes these come together, another would be air bubbles shooting back into the pool, which is what's pictured there. And if you're having these and the pool does not lose water with the pump running, but perhaps it does lose water when the pump is not running, then that could be a sign that you have a suction side leak. Sometimes we'll get mud or dirt that's actually sucked into the strainer pot of the pump, and even sometimes gravel if it's a huge leak. And we confirm that by doing a pressure test and pressure testing that suction line. So those are some signs that we might have a suction side plumbing leak. So some other false indicators of air bubbles in the strainer pot or air bubbles in the pool. Most of the time, if that's happening, it's not because we have a suction side leak. Most of the time it's happening because either the strainer pot lid or the union that's on the suction side in front of the pump is leaking air. So that can be a false indicator there. So the first thing you're going to do is check that strainer pot lid or check the that union. All right, any questions up to this point? Thoughts, observations? And I don't think I can see the chat very good either, Mike and Bethany, so if you guys can make sure to let me know if anybody chimes in on the chat. All right, so what are some signs of a pressure side leak? And this picture here up top is definitely a pressure side leak. We can tell because of the amount of water that's shooting out. So water loss is a sign. The pool loses more water with the pump on. We've got mud or dirt flowing into the pool, but not necessarily through the pump. We get wet, mushy spots in the yard. And then we have more water in the drain pipe than normal. And we would confirm that we have a pressure side leak by doing a pressure test. Sorry, the third type of plumbing leak would be a leak in the conduit, the light conduit. And what's not really intuitive about this is that the light conduits are actually flooded with water. So anything below water level, there are light conduits are flooded with water, and that means that they have to be watertight. So that means we have to pay close attention to every connection, and just like on the electrical conduits, the same as we do for our pool plumbing. So signs of a light conduit leak, the water in the pool would leak down to the light and stop. That's kind of an obvious one. And then we get the same amount of water loss with the pump on or off, okay? And then we would confirm that we have a leak with a dye test around the light, which we're gonna go into that process. So, so what are some causes of plumbing leaks? There's quite a few. So one is just the connections that we make, you know, when we're gluing the pipe and fittings together. So that can happen from improperly cleaned or glued fittings. Sometimes, you know, we might not clean or prime as well as we should. And sometimes we can't really see all the way around the pipe. And a lot of times we might not get glue around the backside of the pipe or the inside of the fitting as well as we think we do. So we have to make sure we do that properly. And on that note, we also need to make sure that the pipe and fitting, that they're dry. And because if it's too wet, then the glue weld doesn't take, you know, the glue actually doesn't melt the plastic. And so we have to make sure that they're dry too. Sometimes we don't get the pipe bottomed out into the socket. We think we do. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're not sure if we got it or not. And if that's the case, just do it over. You know, it's not, you know, pipe is, relatively speaking, a pipe and a fitting, piece of pipe and a fitting is relatively cheap compared to the alternative. So sometimes we dry fit a connection, and we might do a bunch of connections just because we might have a complex area that we're working in. Then we forget to go back and glue each connection. We've certainly had that happen. Sometimes our glue or primer can be expired or contaminated. So when you're using your glue, if it's too dry looking, or if it has big clumps in it, that's a sign that it might not be. If they get wet, they get really clumpy. If they get old, they get dry. So make sure that you're using good primer and good glue. And by the way, each one of these so far we've experienced ourselves. Plumbing connection misaligned. So sometimes you might try to work a connection and you really have to force it, but the angles aren't right. That angle is certainly can cause a couple different problems. One is that you don't have a good glue joint, and the other is you could that fitting might eventually fail and break. So we've had issues by using the wrong fittings. So you might, sometimes when you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, in a pinch, you might get the fittings with the shallow sockets. Those are not what we want to use. Those are not rated for pressure. So we have to make sure we're using the right fittings. All right. So more causes of plumbing leaks. Sometimes.
Jason, real quick, Frank had a question. What about the leaks at the junction box at pool panel?
Yeah, good question, Frank. We're gonna we'll get into that one. Junction box meaning a light situation. So yeah, good one. So causes of plumbing leaks. Also, can be cracks or breaks in the pipe or in a fitting, as I just mentioned. So I'm going to show. Here's a video. This is me on a job site a while back. Here's how to find a leak the hard way. We got very rocky soil. Started up the filter system Friday night, sucked in a bunch of mud. There, we knew it was going to be outside of the concrete patio leak, that is. And so the water was coming out of the ground right here. So I started digging a pothole. The water was coming from the left. So I moved to the left, dug another pothole. And the water was still coming from the left. So I dug another pothole. And it didn't seem as though the water was coming from here, so I dug that pothole. Turns out there's the leak. Water's flowing in from the pool right now. Got a pump. There's a gaping hole in the 2-inch skimmer line, which I'm going to uncover and repair right now. Yeah, it's kind of a dark day. And unfortunately, it's, happened way too much over, since we started the company. So a lot of this stuff is just, you can see, like, that's all hand digging in hard clay with rocky soil. That plumbing was 2.5 feet down, and it was a tangled mess of pipe, down in that hole. And so that was not a fun repair. The question is, how could that have been avoided in that case? Well, in that particular case, there was rock that was in the backfill. We're going to talk about that. But there was rock in the backfill material that broke the pipe. And but so there's a variety of things that can cause this issue of breaking the pipe or cracking fittings. Sometimes there's protruding objects in the bottom of the trench. So it could be a root, it could be a dirt clod, it could certainly be a rock. And we're going to talk about prevention too. Right now we're kind of just talking about, all these different potential issues, but we're going to hit really hard on prevention of all these things too. Rocks in the backfill soil, which is what got me on that particular video. Sometimes equipment can crush the pipe, and sometimes it's the equipment, that pushes the soil down, which might have rocks in it, or and that's what breaks the pipe. We certainly had it happen where a concrete contractor or fence contractor drives a stake or drills a hole when drilling for a fence post through pipe. So that's where our project management component comes in, and we have to make sure that they're aware of where our plumbing lines are before they start doing that. Sometimes just not having the plumbing sit flat in the trench will do it. So sometimes your trench may have a peak, maybe it changes elevations, and sometimes installers might be prone to just lay that pipe just flat in the trench, in the bottom of the trench, and then when it's backfilled, it causes a hinge point in the pipe, and that can cause either the pipe or the fitting to fail. So the trench needs to be flat, and you need to make sure that the pipe is resting securely on a base before it's backfilled, or you do that as you're backfilling. Make sure that there's stone or good soil, soft soil under the pipe before you backfill. Sometimes there's pressure on a fitting that causes it to crack, as we mentioned. And sometimes the pipe might be cracked when we receive it, which we had happen one time. And I think that, it was, this was pipe that was loose. It wasn't in a big hack. And the pipe apparently had just been kind of dropped one piece at a time, like on a warehouse floor. And there was these hairline cracks, 2-3 feet long throughout about 20% of that pipe that we did not see. And, you know, we found it when it was too late and it had already been installed, and we were pressure testing. Sometimes when you're cutting a piece of pipe that's, you know, if you're plumbing around the outside of a pool or you're plumbing down in a trench, there might be other pipe, you know, a bundle of other pipe right there where you have to make a cut. And, you know, we've had it happen where a Sawzall, when you make your cut, you cut the pipe you intend to cut, but you also cut a little bit into a pipe behind it or beside it, and you don't know. So that has happened over the years several times. So you have to make sure you separate whatever you're cutting from the other bundle of pipe, and also make sure you inspect, you know, any pipe that you're cutting around. All right, so, you know, we've got plumbing leaks, one type that we've already covered. Now there's structural leaks. And so how do we identify, or really what we need to figure out is it a leak in the pool shell itself, or is it a leak in one of the fittings? And if it's a leak in the pool shell, you're usually not going to miss that. I mean, it's usually a pretty big issue. The picture on the left, you know, that's not one of our pools, but it is a structural issue, and that's pretty obvious unless the pool water is filthy and you can't see to the bottom. Obviously, that's going to be losing a lot of water, but usually if there's a pool shell issue, it's very obvious. The one only area that might not be obvious and might be a slow leak situation might be in the corners of the deep end. You know, especially on pools that have a convenience ledge. And we haven't seen this on our pools, but we have seen it on other manufacturers' pools where that corner will open up, and sometimes it could take a year, 2, 3 years, but a crack will develop in that corner, deep end corner, and that can be the source of a leak. So you would confirm that with a dye test. So basically, any leak that's in plumbing, aside from the electrical conduit, we're going to determine whether there's actually a leak with a pressure test. And any type of a structural leak, we're going to confirm that with a dye test. All right, so what are some possible leak locations? So we could have return fittings, light fittings, skimmers, bubblers, main drain fittings. Again, we confirm all that with a dye test. So what are some causes of these issues? Well, when we install the fittings or the skimmers or the bubblers, the backside of the pool might not be flat. You know, a lot of times that's the cause, that when we did our grinding on the backside of the pool, it wasn't perfectly flat. We might not have used enough silicone adhesive. And then it could be that when we install our return fittings, or any what we call a bulkhead fitting. A bulkhead fitting is any fitting that goes through the pool shell and has a nut on the backside. So sometimes that nut, if we over tighten it, it'll pop. And that pop is actually the plastic threads slipping back, a thread or two back. And once that happens, you really have to throw that fitting away and start over again. And sometimes that might happen, and it might be someone who doesn't know, and they're like, huh, that's weird. And then they move on to the next fitting. Well, if it pops, it's not as tight as it should be. And sometimes the fitting might not be tight enough. We might not put enough tension on it when we're tightening it down. And then other times it's because the fitting wasn't properly supported, and then the backfill caused a settlement issue, which caused that fitting to fail. So when a return or light fitting fails, a lot of times what you'll see is that it's actually up on the inside of the fitting where the threads are, where the eyeball threads in, and that the crack actually develops in those threads at the top of the fitting. So you can't see that, you know, just looking down from the pool. And we're going to get into some leak detection type of tools here in a bit. But that's a lot of times where if those fittings fail, which the fittings we use now typically don't fail, but if they do, that's usually where it would happen. All right, so back to Frank's question about the light conduit. So what's going on there, Frank, and chime in here if you need. But when we run our light conduit, because it's a flooded conduit, it fills with water, and so that water is going to try to equalize with the water level in the pool. So if our junction box is lower than the water level in the pool, then that would probably be the issue. If that's what's going on, you might just need to raise that junction box up above water level in the pool, and that would fix the problem.
Well, in this case, the junction box is above the water level in the pool.
Okay.
And in fairness, I didn't know what was going on, so I had to get Addison, and he figured it out.
Okay.
But it only would happen, and it was from a bubbler feature when we had the pressure,
Okay.
the pump
Yeah.
speed on high.
Yeah.
So essentially what Addison derived is we didn't seat the bubbler well. So when it's high pressure, that water is escaping. So we've got to just reseat the bubbler.
Correct.
And hopefully that'll fix it.
Yeah, that I think you're right on with that, correct? Because with those color vision bubblers, the all that water pressure is coming through that bubbler housing, and that light fitting does lock in. And I think we had that issue once where we didn't get the light locked in correctly, and it did the same thing. So I think Addison's spot on with that one. And by the way, our regular light fittings, when we put the lights in with the micro bright lights, we pull the cable through, we lock the light in. That does not seal that. That's why the conduit floods. And they are Pentair, there is a way that there's an O-ring and some lubricant, and there probably is a way to seal that, but we've been able to mostly seal it, but we don't ever count on that being sealed 100%. We always count on the fact that light fitting is going to leak some. All right, so let's talk about some of the leak detection processes we use. Like, we think we've got a leak, how do we figure it out, if there actually is a leak and where? So there's 3 basic tests that we need to be familiar with. There's what's called the bucket test, there's pressure testing, which we are familiar with already, and then there's dye testing. So we're going to go into each one of those. So bucket test is pretty basic. It's also called a hydrostatic water test, but basically what we're doing is, fill a bucket, mostly. We'll fill the pool up first, fill the bucket to the normal, fill the pool up, turn the water features off. If there's an autofill, make sure that's turned off, partially fill the bucket with water, mark the water level inside and outside of the bucket, and wait 24 hours. You're going to leave the pump on or off depending on what the situation is, which we're going to get into a little bit of a flow chart later to help us, assess whether we should be testing with the pump on or off, and then measure the difference after 24 hours. You see the bucket is in the pool. That's important because that helps keep the water in the bucket and the water in the pool. It helps keep the bucket and the water in the bucket the same temperature as the water of the pool in the pool. So obviously, if we're losing more water in the pool than we are in the bucket, then we know we've got an issue, and that'll also help us to understand how much water we're losing. So that is a bucket test. With pressure testing, we basically follow the same process that we do when we're pressure testing, our normal installation plumbing. But we test one line at a time. We can use water or we can use air, and we do a max of 20 psi for lines that are 2 inches and smaller, 5 psi for larger lines. And 20 is a max, 15 is fine. Don't go any higher than 20. We also need to make sure we're using the right plugs. So plugs that are either threaded plugs for returns, make sure we're not getting any leakage there. And then if we're using a rubber plug, make sure they're the straight-sided plugs, not kind of like those winterization plugs that are kind of tapered on the side. And if we lose pressure in 2 minutes, then we know we've got an issue. So That's pressure testing, dye testing. So here's a video from, and I referenced kind of Andersen, the Andersen company, the leaktools.com people, and tremendous resources on their website. And I'm just going to share 2 videos with you about dye testing because they're pretty good.
From Andersen Manufacturing Company. Today we're going to talk about dye testing. The purpose of dye testing is to confirm whether the location of a leak that you've identified visually is actually causing a leak problem, that there's actually water escaping from the pool. So in order to dye test, the process is to put a small amount of dye close to that suspected leak location. And in the swimming pool, there are a variety of suspected leak locations. We're going to check around fittings, we're going to check around skimmers, cracks in the pool, anything that we've visually identified, especially a seam between several different materials that could be a source of that leak. Common misconception is that one would be able to just put a big cloud of dye into the pool and watch where that dye moves to identify where the leaks are. That's not possible. With dye testing, we're putting a very small amount of dye very close to someplace we already suspect is leaking. The first step is to assure that the water is calm and we don't have any currents. So I've turned off the pool equipment. Now we're going to put a small amount of dye right close to those suspected leak areas. I find that the easiest way to administer a small amount of dye is to hold on to the dye tester, not like we would a normal syringe with our thumb on top, but to use my thumb and my first finger to hold the barrel, and then the base of my palm to push the barrel in. That gives me the ability to really put a fine ribbon of dye close to where I suspect that leak is. I also find it's helpful to have an inspection mirror available as well. That way, when we're checking around return fittings and skimmers, we can look up underneath the fitting as well. At Andersen Manufacturing Company, we have dye testers available in a couple different styles. We have a fluorescent yellow that shows up real well against dark backgrounds and is especially helpful in light niches or dark skimmers. We also have the more popular blue color, which shows up real well against your most common light backgrounds. We also have the dye available in refill bottles, and it's real easy to refill your dye tester. Just flip up the flip top lid, and then the nozzle will go right down into the hole. You can easily refill with no spills. Happy leak finding.
All right. And then here's one other really short video that actually shows the dye going into a return fitting. And see how it's just taking it in there? They're using the fluorescent dye. Most of what we're going to be using is the darker colored, but it just draws it right in there. So that's kind of what we're looking for there. All right, so that's how dye testing works. And we're going to go into a variety of leak tools that we should have on us, you know, at our that we have, and also some things that would be nice to have, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So things that we should keep on us all the time, or you should have at your disposal: pressure test equipment, obviously, which we get a good source for that is the Leak Tools website. The dye, which you can get at Leak Tools or from SCP, and you're going to want to buy a syringe, but really the bottle is the way to go, because if you're, you know, spending any amount of time trying to find a leak, you're going to go through multiple syringes worth of dye. So I'd advise getting the bottle. The inspection mirror that he showed in the video, and all this stuff is cheap, relatively cheap. Dye testing cones. So this is these little orange cones here. Now, these are, I think you can get a set of these for like $35. And the issue we run into a lot of times when we have to, let's say we think we have a leak in like spa jets, which is, you know, nightmare scenario. What these cones will do is, because of their shape, you can actually plug basically any type of a hole with the cone. So anything down from like a ½ inch on up to, you know, about 1.5 inches, these cones will plug those holes. So for an example, let's say we have some spa jets, 6 spa jets that we want to dye test. We could plug we would plug 5 of those with the orange cones. And then the 6th one, we would put the cone that has the little tube coming out of it. And, you know, with the spa full of water, obviously, we would try to inject dye in the end of that tube. And if the tube takes the dye, then we know we have a leak in the spa jet plumbing somewhere. So that works with any type of fitting. And, you know, it's a fast test, and it's usually, you know, some people, you might think initially that, hey, I've got 3 return jets. I'll just, you know, squirt some dye in front of one of the eyeballs, and, you know, if there's a leak, I'll watch that return eyeball just suck the dye in. It doesn't work that way. What actually happens is water is usually moving in and out of those return fittings when the pump is off just a little bit. And also there's so much water, the orifice size of those eyeballs are so big that the amount of leak that you have, you probably don't have enough leak there to take the dye in. So what the cones do for you, they allow you to have a concentrated source to be able to inject dye. So it works great for just about, you know, it works great for any return fittings, spa jets, therapy jets, anything like that. So for 35 bucks, it's almost an instant, and it almost gives you, I mean, within 15 minutes, you can know for a fact whether or not you have a leak in one of those lines. You can also check the skimmer line the same way. So basically any plumbing line, you know, anywhere that you can put a cone inside under the water, you can use this cone tool to find whether or not you have a leak. So pool putty is kind of a go-to, kind of a standard thing that we should have. This is a 2-part epoxy, and you kind of cut equal portions off of the red, off of the blue, and off of the white tubes, and you knead it together. And then, you know, you have, you know, usually it depends on how hot it is outside, but you might have anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes before it sets up on you. And you can apply pool putty. It bonds underwater. So let's say you have, you know, a structural issue with the pool. Let's say, you know, you find that there is a crack in the corner of the deep end of the pool shell. You can mix up some pool putty, and you can put that right on that, and it'll stop the leak. You can also put pool putty around return fittings, and you can basically, you know, slap it on just about anything, and it'll serve as a temporary leak fix until you can do a more permanent repair. Not typically it's something that you're going to rely on over the long term. So pool putty you can get from SCP. I think there's some other products now that are kind of underwater 2-part epoxy type putty products. And I think that there's probably minor differences between them. And I think Lowe's or Home Depot has one. And Grayson, you probably know what it's called. I don't think you're on there, but there's different types of this product, pool putty out there. So it's important to have a good set of goggles. So Julian, one of our techs, I asked him what type of goggles he uses, and he uses a brand called Cressy. I bought a pair for myself a year or 2 back. I got it off Amazon for like 40 bucks. And you know, when you're diving underwater to find things, you're only as good as your vision. And so it's really important that you're able to, if you're under there for any amount of time, you know, it's important that we're comfortable and that we can see, and that we don't have water kind of constantly flooding our goggles. And it's good to have a snorkel. Sometimes we might just have to poke our head under the water and maybe get a visual on something under the water. Submersible pump, you know, something that you're going to need. It's usually probably keep on hand anyway, but if you're going out to do any type of leak work and it's going to be underground, you're going to most likely need to have a submersible pump with you. So those are things that we should have. And again, these are all relatively inexpensive. If you go ahead and buy it now, you'll have it, and hopefully you'll never need it or never need to use it. But those are some things that we should have now. Something that would be nice to have, dive equipment. So this thing is called the Super Snorkel. You can get it from the Leak Tools site. It's 1,300 bucks. And it's just a little compressor that you set right on top of the pool deck, and it's got a, you know, a breather. And so, you know, if you have to do any, like comprehensive leak detection, let's say you needed to test main drains, main drain fittings, you know, and you need to be underwater for any amount of time, you know, over the years, I got really, really good at holding my breath. And so I kind of made that work. But then when I used this for the first time, it was a game changer. So just a good set of goggles, and this thing, you can stay underwater comfortably for a long time. Sometimes you might not be trying to find a leak when you do that. Sometimes you might be working on trying to get mud stains or some spot on the bottom of the pool up, you know, rather than have to come back up for air every, you know, however many seconds. This can allow you to get it done really quick. And a weight belt or a weight vest. And rather than try to hold your buddy down with a telescopic pole, which, you know, happens, to get a weight belt, you just kind of stay, you get the right amount of weight in there, which is very simple. And you just kind of are able to just kind of park yourself down on the pool, work, you can breathe, you can see, and you just get the stuff done without a lot of pain, and you get it done in a short amount of time. All right, so some professional leak detection equipment that's out there, just so you all are aware of it. There's listening devices. So this device in the upper right, basically the way it works, let's say, and we're going to talk about when to contact a professional here in a second, but if you have a leak that that's under the patio somewhere, how do you find out where that is? Well, what you do, the process is basically to flood the line that's leaking with water to saturate the soil and what's around it with water. Then you put air on that line, which causes bubbles. So the more water around it, the louder the bubbles are. And then these listening devices, it's basically composed of a headphone, a very large microphone, basically, that's made to sit on top of the patio, that connects to like an electronic indicator that tells you the amount of decibels, how loud the sounds are, and then a pair of headphones. So you can actually hear the bubbles, and the display will show you how loud the sounds are. So you can actually measure the loudness, because you might not be able to distinguish the loudness between two different areas. And so you go through that process with these bubbles that are happening. You're listening, and what you do is you kind of go around, spot check. You go around the whole patio, and then the spot where it's the loudest, that's where you think the leak is. Sometimes it's not that way, but that's basically how a listening device works. It also can work, instead of having the microphone that sits on top of the pool deck, there's also a ground probe that you can stick in the ground and listen that way as well. So those devices are usually somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000 for something like that. And my experience with those is I've got too much experience with them, and I've been able to locate leaks right on the money, and I've been really fooled sometimes too, because sometimes bubbles happen or occur in areas where there's not a leak. So that can lead to some pretty destructive wrong answers. So that's listening devices. So there's also electronic leak measuring tools, which is what's in the left-hand picture there. And it will give you, if you let that, you basically hook the machine up, let it run for within 15 minutes, it can tell you exactly how much water you're losing at what rate you're losing water. And then there's an inspection camera, which is the bottom right-hand picture. And I've got another video to show you guys of when I used an inspection camera one time. All right, leak detection 201 here. We've got a leaky cascade line dug down, so we could go straight in to the cascade line. I rented this camera inspection device from United Rentals, and I fed the camera in probably, I don't know how many feet, maybe 30 or 40 feet. And as you can see, I just found the problem there. You can see, backing the camera up, pulling it ahead, and you can see there's, it looks like the pipe got crushed right at a coupling. And yep, that's our issue right there. I'm just going to keep going just to make sure there's not anything else, but that is our issue. So this leak was so big that we tried to put air on it, and it wouldn't even hold air pressure. So normally you put air pressure on, and you saturate the line with water, so it saturates the surrounding area with water. Then you put air on it, and you listen with a listening device. But the hole was so big that it wasn't making any bubbles. The air was just flowing out of it like there was no connection at all. So we went and got this camera, and that's how we found it. All right. So my experience with the camera was I've tried that. That's the only time I rented the camera myself, and I found the leak. So I think I don't know what the camera costs, probably $400 is probably about what it costs, or maybe it's $250, $300, $400 for half a day. And so for a leak that's what you suspect is a very big leak, that's probably a good place to start, renting that camera. Now the trick there is it's not gonna go around a tight 90-degree fitting in a 2-inch line. It's gonna get hung up there. So in some ways I lucked out. I was able to dig down and get a straight shot in from the ground, but if I had to go through a 90, it wouldn't have made it. So all right, so let's see, are there any questions? Let's pause for questions for a second. All right, we're going to keep rocking and rolling. So we know there's all these different types of leaks. We know there's ways to find these leaks. Okay, but where do I start? So here's a flow chart that I found. It's very good. It's from the Anderson Company, and it basically walks us through the process. All right, so some of this stuff is intuitive, but to have a written process is always a good thing. So if we follow this through, we basically start with a bucket test, and the bucket test is always going to tell you how much water you're losing. Now, if you don't want to wait 24 hours, then you can go ahead and you can pressure test right away, or you can, if you have the leak detection cones, you can do that as well. All right, so you can get in, and the leak detection cones are kind of part of a dye test. So if you think you have a leak, that's going to come to you either by the customer or from a team member is going to notice, man, look, I got there yesterday, the water level was up at where it should be, and today it was at the bottom of the skimmer. I think we might have an issue. Well, if you think you might have an issue, number one, do not pour concrete and do not move forward with your pool patio. You need to stop, and you need to find out for sure whether or not you have a leak. So, but basically once you suspect there is an issue, you can do the bucket test, you can do dye test, you can do pressure test, and but you need to understand exactly whether or not you have a leak. That's the first step. But we're not going to go through this whole flow chart, but we do have there is a document that we're going to share with you that has links to all these videos and the different materials and supplies we're talking about, and these flow charts, so that you can reference these. There's a second page here that kind of runs through the pressure testing process. But essentially what we're doing is the first thing we're trying to assess is whether or not the leak is structural in nature or whether it's a plumbing leak. And we can find out the structural ones sometimes take a little more time to find. If it's a plumbing leak, then usually a pressure test will tell us pretty quickly which line is leaking, and we know for sure that we have an issue. When we're in the process of determining, and by the way too, a pressure test, they can be wrong if you don't have reliable equipment. Sometimes our pressure testing gauges, and sometimes the pressure testing apparatus gets old and leaks. Sometimes fittings might leak. So the only way to know for sure if your pressure test is accurate is to know that your equipment is reliable. So But we basically, when we get into it, we're gonna do a pressure test, and we're gonna do a visual inspection. We're just gonna walk around and we're gonna look inside the skimmer at the skimmer faceplate. We're gonna look at each fitting, the return fittings, the light fittings. We're gonna look at the bubblers, and we're just gonna look around and visually inspect and see if we can find any issues. We're gonna look for wet spots in the yard, and we're gonna ultimately, if we have not poured our pool deck yet, then we can do all that. Then if all else fails, we can start pulling gravel out and start looking for the issue. All right, so when should we call a professional? We're going to call a professional leak detector if we have a plumbing leak that we can't pinpoint, usually somewhere under the patio. So we know we've got the issue. We know it's somewhere under the patio. Most of the time, we will, if we know we've got a plumbing line leak, we will start to dig, and just look for indications in the plumbing trench. Hopefully we can find it. We'll dig down somewhere and we'll look for water, just like I did in the one video. And in that case, I was able to see what direction the water was coming into the hole from. So I just kind of kept going that direction until I found the leak. Well, let's say in that case that I would have continued to do that process all the way until I got to the pool deck. Well, then we would know that the leak is under the pool deck, in which case you would need to call a professional leak detector to do that. Or you could drop, $2,000 on a listening device, which I wouldn't recommend doing, but you could. So, or just in some cases, you might have done everything you can and still reached out to us, for whatever reason, we just can't figure out what's going on. That almost never happens. But if we absolutely hit a dead end, that's another time to reach out to a professional leak detector. So a few things you need to know about professional leak detectors. They're expensive. And then right now, you can't even, in Virginia, I think they're backed up for like 9 months. I mean, it's crazy. And also, they don't always get the location right. A lot of times, they're almost every time, if it's under a pool deck, they're trying to locate with the listening device. And again, you get false readings sometimes, and they can be wrong about that. And sometimes it could be a foot or two, and sometimes it could be a lot more than that. So that's a conversation to have with them. Hopefully you'll never get to that point where you have to hire one, but if you do, make sure you have the conversation with them about, hey, how sure are you of this? What happens if you're wrong? All right, so now let's talk about making repairs. Let's say we know we got a leak, we found the leak, now we got to make a repair. So with plumbing leaks, you want to avoid these compression fittings. So this upper right fitting with the big red hack through it, they rely on basically two little unions or compression couplings on each end of that. And so basically they fit, the pipe fits in that, then you tighten that down. We do not want to use those. That is not suitable for what we're doing. The two fittings on the bottom are proper plumbing compression repair fittings. So they're basically the same. They basically work the same way. The one on the left is basically a long tube, basically a piece of pipe. And then there's two pieces, those two to the left-hand side, those two pieces actually break apart and they both slide over each end of the pipe. The one on the right, on the left side of that 2-inch pipe or whatever size pipe inserts into that right here, just like that's a fitting. On this side, you glue a coupling and then basically this extends, and there's two O-rings inside of that apparatus there, and you just can basically fit the one side on, and then you slide the other coupling on, and it gives you a variable length you can work with, and it holds up to some ridiculous 750 psi. Okay, so these are the two fittings that we want to use to make repairs if we want to use some type of a repair coupling type situation. There's other times where we might have to, sometimes like in the picture of the video that I showed earlier, sometimes we're working in a huge of other pipe, and a lot of times we'll just have to remove, cut a lot of that out and just replumb all of it. Sometimes we might be able to leave a lot of it in and work around it. And there might be times where we maybe have to even kind of 90 up and back over and down again, just to make it work, so long as the connections are good, and so long as the pipe is secure, meaning like if we had to 90 up, we're able to backfill that in a way to where that doesn't get crushed, then there's not an issue with that. We do want to avoid using the hard 90s on the skimmer lines. So we could use sweep 90s or whatever else we need to do there. All right, and there are certainly times where you can tunnel under concrete decks, and you can do that to repair fittings, to replace fittings. You can also do it to repair plumbing. That is possible, and it is done. And how far can you go? Well, some of it depends on the soil condition and some other things, but we've gone, 6 feet is not, I think we've gone as much as 8 feet, which sounds crazy. But we have, and you just have to make sure that you're not in a situation where anything can collapse on you. So when you're making these repairs, if there's any doubt, sometimes we really have to struggle to make the connections. If there's any doubt about, whether or not you made the connection right, then you want to go ahead and cut that out. All right, so replacing leaking light and return fittings. Again, you can tunnel under the decks to do that, or you can tear out. And so there's so when you have to tear a section out, then now we're introducing a whole nother component to this, with regards to, now we've got concrete that's the color's probably not going to match. Maybe we're just, there's some different scenarios that can lead to some complicated conversations with customers, but we just basically are transparent. But it is perfectly okay when needed to tear out the deck and put it back, knowing it's not going to match. And we just work with the customer the best we can with that. You can actually swap out return fittings and light fittings with the pool full of water. And the way that works is you kind of get everything prepped, and you basically pop one out, pop the other one back in really fast, and it seals right up, and it works great. We've done it a lot of times, unfortunately, and we've never had an issue with it. So what do you do if the pool shell itself is leaking? Number one, we want to get pictures of it, because if it's one of our pool shells, then it shouldn't be leaking. So there's either a warranty issue where the pool has failed, which almost never happens, or there's something else going on. Perhaps the customer drained the pool, perhaps the water, perhaps there was a leak in a plumbing line that caused the water level to lower, and that's what caused the structural issue with the pool. Either way, we just want to get pictures of the damage, whatever the damage to the shell is, and we want to get pictures of the surrounding area there. We want to try to get to the bottom of why it happened. And if it's a small type of a structural issue, we can use pool putty to stop the leak until we can get out to do a permanent repair on the shell. We do want to keep the pool full of water. Okay, that's very important. And we want to make sure that we keep a submersible pump in the drain pipe to keep removing that groundwater, so we don't get a buildup of groundwater around the outside of the pool. And then obviously reach out to us, contact us, our warranty department, so we can get the things going that we need to get the pool shell fixed back up. All right, so some best practices, just generally, we've got a leak scenario. If we're losing an inch or more a day, that's a serious leak, and we need to stop what we're doing and give that our full attention. If we're losing an inch a day, then now we have an issue where that could lead to some other issues. And a lot of times with leaks, the way it works is it's not just that we have a leak. The leak, when you saturate the outside of the pool shell with water, sometimes some other things can change. And with River Pool's way of doing things, that's not as much of an issue as it used to be. But back in the day with, when the plumbing wasn't secured and there was sand backfill and, a number of other things, then a leak a lot of times led to down a path of, destruction, just where one leak led to more settlement, which led to another leak, which led to, pool wall bulging, which led to a structural failure. So just general best practices, an inch a day is a lot, and we need to get it fixed ASAP and, make sure that we don't just let that linger. We do need to keep the pool full of water. And we need to, again, keep a submersible pump in the drain pipe to keep that water removed from the outside of the pool shell. And if the leak, if we, for whatever reason, we can't stop the leak from occurring, and because we can't find it, or it's too fast of a leak and the water level gets down, below the skimmer, we need to go ahead and brace that pool shell. And again, get pictures and document everything. All right, so, and then also the main thing with, and I didn't put this down as a best practice, and we're going to talk about communicating with customers here in a sec, but they need to, when they're aware that there's a leak, it is a big scary thing for them, and they need to know that we're there for them. So we need to make sure that we're staying in contact with them. First off, we need to actually give it our attention, and number two, we need to be giving them daily updates to make sure that they know what's going on. So again, hopefully you'll never have to deal with any of this. And the idea is that by following, the River Pools way, that we can prevent leaks from ever happening. So one of the big ones is using rigid pipe versus flex pipe. And I wanted to show you this picture. This is actually, a piece of flex pipe that I held in my hand. And if you look at all these big holes, those are bug chews. So termites or ants actually ate those holes in that flexible pipe. And so that's one of the many issues with flex pipe and why we don't use it. So we need to visually inspect every connection. So getting back to dry fitting, and sometimes we can forget to go back and make a glue connection. That's one reason we need to go back. The fact that we use blue glue, one of the reasons is because we can go back and we can actually see glue around every joint. So we need to, when we inspect, we need to make sure that we're seeing glue, and then make sure that there's enough of it. And, in other words, if you see, it looks like one whole half of that connection is dry, then you might want to give that a better inspection and probably even cut it out and replace it. We use the designated return fittings, and we follow our process for installing those fittings. That is so important that we do that right. Not only do we use the CMP or waterway fittings with the big bulky nut on the backside, but that we insert the 1.5 inch pipe on the inside, because that does two things to prevent leaks. Number one, it fuses the front and back half of that fitting together, which makes it much more difficult for that fitting to cock and rock as that fitting is fused into one piece. And it also locks the fitting and prevents the backside of that fitting from breaking off. So using the right return fittings, which we also use for the micro brights, and using the 1.5 inch pipe on the inside of that fitting is very important. It's important that we use the specified sealants on the fittings, and which is a Boss 801 tile adhesive or an equivalent. There's other manufacturers, NovaGuard and some others, that make basically the same adhesive, but it's important that we use the right sealant, that we use our plumbing straps, and that we not only use the plumbing straps, but we use them where we need to use them. The plumbing straps are there. Do they hold the plumbing up while we pre-plumb the pool before we set it in the ground? Yes, but that's only one of the purposes. The main purpose is to prevent the settlement of the fittings, of the return fittings, and to prevent settlement of the plumbing. So we need to have a strap designated at every return fitting and every main drain fitting. And also, we need to make sure that they're spaced out properly about every 4 to 6 feet around the pool. Using clean crushed stone for backfill, that's important because when we place the stone, as we know, the stone that we use does not have stone dust or fines in it, which means it compacts on placement. So we don't have to worry about the backfill material settling and pulling the plumbing down, which causes leaks. And we need to make sure that we bed the plumbing trench with stone and encase plumbing lines in stone in soil conditions that could cause leak issues, either rocky soil or soil that's really hard, like a really hard clay. So, make sure that we bed our plumbing trenches in stone, and also that we encase the plumbing lines in stone, because when we backfill with a soil that's really hard or a soil that has rock in it, it can puncture the plumbing line. And that we go ahead and pressure test every water line for 15 minutes, 15 pounds at 15 minutes for lines 2 inches and smaller. For 2.5 inch lines or larger, we pressure test at 5 psi. All right, so some other frequently asked questions here. So how do I communicate a leak situation with the customer? First off, the question is, should I always tell them? And when I tell them, how should I tell them? That's a good question. About, when should we tell them or not? If it's a leak that our first inclination is, if it's something that we can find and fix in the same day or next day, and it doesn't delay the schedule, and it doesn't really result in any additional stress on their part, then no, we just find it and we fix it and we move on. If it is causing a delay in the schedule, or if it's something that they will notice, in other words, a lot of this can come up, during, let's say it's a leak that we find during the installation process. That's an instance where we probably wouldn't even bring it up. We would just find it, fix it, and move on. If it's a leak post-construction, there's a good chance that they've actually been the one to find the leak. And so a lot of times they're bringing that to our attention. Sometimes there might be a leak that we find during the install process, before we're finished with the project, but it's after the pool deck is poured. In that case, we would try to find it and fix it quickly. But if it's the sort of thing where we've got a customer that's always outside, very observant, is actively using the pool, there's no problem with just, obviously just telling them, hey, you know what, we do have a leak somewhere, and we're on it. We're going to get it fixed for you. Don't worry about it. We're going to make sure we keep you posted on everything there. So come right out and tell them that's certainly perfectly fine. In instances where the job's done and they're using the pool and they call us and there's a leak, then obviously the communication there has to be on point. We have to be communicating with them on a regular basis. They're going to be scared to death. They're going to be scared their entire pool deck is going to get torn up. Their pool's going to have to be pulled out and replaced. They're going to miss, the whole summer of swimming. They're thinking all these things. So we need to make sure to put their mind at ease. And a lot of times what we'll do is if there is a leak and we do find it during the swim season, then, if it's possible for the pool to function, then we'll go ahead and just fix it after the season. But the main thing is to be upfront and to be very blunt about it. Like, yeah, look, this has happened. We're really sorry. We're here for you, and just be very reassuring in your the way that you communicate with them. So another question, are leaks covered under warranty? Well, as at River Pools, we have a 5-year workmanship warranty. So and it's the best warranty that I've ever seen. I mean, I think we have a great warranty, and it's a 3-year full workmanship warranty. Year 4 covers 50%, year 5 covers 25%. That's technically, honestly, if we have issues in years 4 and 5, we usually don't end up charging the customer anything. That's just the way we've typically handled it. You can handle it however you want. But yes, the leaks are covered under the workmanship warranty, both plumbing leaks and leaks in fittings. And obviously the pool structural warranty is a lifetime structural warranty. So that's not part of the workmanship warranty. Is it okay to let the water level drop in the pool? Usually the answer to that question is no. We want to keep the pool full. There are instances where if you continue to fill the pool, if it's a severe leak, that it just continues to drop and flood the outside of the pool with more water. But 99 out of 100 times, you want to keep the pool full of water and keep submersible pump in the drain pipe to keep removing that groundwater. One way to, what you might run into, hopefully not, but you might run into a situation where if you're in an area where pools are winterized, that you might pull the cover off a pool, or the customer might pull the cover off and the water has leaked down to the bottom of the skimmer, the bottom of a return, the bottom of a light. That's obvious. Then that's, we have a leak situation there, most likely. Not always the case. It could be that, maybe they have a solid cover that they didn't pump off during the winter, and maybe that water on top displaced the water out of the pool. Not guaranteed to be a leak, but there is instances where the water level does drop over the winter, and that'll give you a good indication of where it is. Usually those situations are fine. There's not an issue, but when we have control of the situation, we do not want to let that water level drop. So what are some pseudo leak scenarios? Some scenarios where you might think you have a leak, but you actually don't. Some things that have actually happened with us. We had one time where the pool, we had a scenario where our concrete guy was on the job prepping for concrete. Now, we had just installed waterline tile on the pool, so the water level in the pool was lower. There was a high water table in that situation on this job site, and we had a submersible pump in the drain pipe. Our concrete contractor put the garden hose from the drain pipe in the pool because he was thinking, well, I'll just fill the pool with the groundwater, which that's not a terrible idea. The water was clean. It was fine actually to do that. Well, what ended up happening was the pool filled up and the pump was unplugged, and then the water from the pool back siphoned through the garden hose back into the drain pipe because the garden hose was left in the pool. And we had lost. And what happened was our concrete guy formed up, concrete showed up the next morning to pour, and the pool was 4 inches lower than it was the day before. And so, of course, we pile on, we try to figure out what's going on and can't find it. And then we ultimately looked at some pictures and saw the garden hose was in there, and that's what ended up happening. So sometimes it's crazy things that can come up and get you. Another, if you have the discharge valve at the pump and filter system, if that's hard piped out, that means you can't actually see the water going through that backwash or discharge line. And that valve could either be bad and you could be leaking water through there, or the valve could be cracked open. So the same thing applies to if you're using a sand filter. Sand filter has a valve that's called a multi-port valve, and sometimes there's a gasket in there that can fail. So when the pump is operating, the water that should be going back into the pool, part of that water is actually going out of the backwash line. And so that's kind of that's one that can cause you to lose water in the pool as well. And sometimes the light conduit, sometimes we might stub up, we might not be thinking about how high we're stubbing up the light conduit in relation to the water level in the pool. And sometimes that could be coming into a junction box, and and we don't even know that water's leaking out there. But if the conduit is stubbed up lower than the pool water level, that can result in a leak as well. It's not a false leak, but it's a leak that's easily remedied, and it's not in the pool shell itself. All right, so just winding down here, what other questions do you all have about leaks or about anything that we've talked about today?
Can you hear me, Jason?
Gotcha.
So is it typical, like whenever you're initially cutting a pool to get air bubbles, out of the return, just like residual air from the lines. Like when you initially first cut the pool on after installation, the first cut on, you get some air bubbles for just like a few minutes and then they subside.
Yeah, so your question is that normal to get that kind of a purge?
Yeah, I know you were stating it was like a good telltale if there's a leak in the suction line.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, it's normal to get that. It's water that's, any water that's gotten into the plumbing, obviously water that's in the filter tank. Yeah, it's normal to get a purge of air back into the pool. A lot when you first start it up the first time, and then some each time you clean the filter. A lot of times you'll get that. Good question. If the system runs and you get your pump primes up and you're running, say on high speed or even like a medium speed, and you continue to get air bubbles in the pump and air bubbles into the pool after, say, 5 minutes, then you might have some issue on the suction side there. It's causing that air should purge out pretty quickly. What other questions you guys have? All right. Well, look, here's the deal with this. My hope is that, because a lot of you joined in after we got started, I need you to share this with your teams. Okay, make it a requirement that everybody on your teams watches this and listens to it, because it will save you a lot of trouble. And all the things, all the little pointers and lessons learned in here, I don't want you to have to go through, what we've had to go through on our end. We want to save you that trouble, and that's what makes me excited to talk about this topic today. I shouldn't know as much as I do about this. The only reason I do is because of all the crap we've had to fix over the years. So with that, you guys take care and hope you have a good rest of your day.